The act around Israel was already the path of least resistance for him to take.
Yeah.
He's not going to lose the support of his major donors in any significant way because of what he did. It will make some of his pro-Israeli donors unhappy, and they may become more open now to becoming enemies of his. That's true. But I don't think that's a big enough phenomena to seriously threaten him, and which is why he took it. I think the contrast between that and either a mass deportation to Mexico or a mass tariff imposition on Mexico, I think that will have much more profound opposition and consequences that will turn major parts of the donor capitalist class in the United States against him. And that will provide allies to the bureaucrats who are looking for donors to be allies in a pushback. Because remember, bureaucrats can look to the donors for allies and vice versa, and they will find each other, and they will become what makes it impossible for Mr. Trump to do anything, as they have done to Republican and Democratic presidents in the past. This is what American real politics is. It's musical chairs among these people, not a serious problem. But the more serious ones, that's why we haven't heard all that much about it. We have a few scary statements by the so-called deportation czar, but we don't know what's really going to happen there yet. The pushback, I'm sure, is building already. You see it in the statements of Sheinbaum. She's made it quite clear, but she's also scared because she doesn't know, like we don't, how far this is going to go. And at what point will the consequences, which are extremely dangerous, in my view, for Mexico and thereby for the United States, no one quite knows yet how far that's going to go before the pushback becomes strong enough to stop it. Mexico depends on remittances from the United States, of the workers here. It depends for its jobs on exports. If you have a massive deportation, you give to Mexico the following 3-point blows: reduction serious in remittances, reduction seriously in jobs as your exports are constrained, and by deportation, a vast influx of millions of people replacing the money that isn't coming anymore, the remittances. There's no way that the Mexican government can handle loss of remittances, loss of jobs, influx of people who need jobs. It is a tsunami. And then you have to ask, what rational mentality would put the open-ended risk of such a tsunami with a country that has a 1,000-mile border with you, whose disruptions are going to overlay? We may see the most ironic switch of all, a level of migration into the United States far larger than we've had in recent years, because literally the alternative for Mexicans is to quietly die in their own country. And we don't want to face any of that. We have no discussion. It is astonishing that I have to make statements, which I do, about the absurdity of a massive deportation, because the Republicans have made this a mass issue and the Democrats have basically said, me too. And so there is no discussion, let alone debate, about what this entails. You're going to see a popularized issue, if it's actually pursued, have unbelievable consequences that will only make people 2 or 3 years from now wonder how this hysteria was allowed to develop as far as it clearly has. The European countries, like Israel, got into bed, hitched their wagon, became dependent on the United States as their military protector, as their economic partner, as their political guarantor. And we now have a leader who has every interest in breaking from all of that. He's going to make a deal with Mr. Putin. They kind of see it coming, and it'll be a deal to end the war in Ukraine, or at least suspend it. And every major leader in Europe has hitched his or her wagon to being supportive in Ukraine. The only exceptions, the Hungarians and the Czechs a little bit and so on, But the others
Right.
are all doing this. Macron in France, he's got no approval. He's a political dead weight. It's even more pathetic to watch Mr. Starmer in England trying to keep going a war in which he was always a junior partner and had no real influence. Mr. Schultz, who's already on his way out because he made that mistake. And economically, look at them. Europe is sinking between the United States on one hand and China on the other. We have our high tech. The Chinese match us. The Europeans, nothing. Nowhere. I think you're going to see real political turmoil in Europe because just like here, the existing Democrats and Republicans prepared the way for Mr. Trump's theater. You're seeing that same process in Europe. And whether the new face comes from the left, which is what you have in France, or it comes from the right, which is what you have in Germany, you're going to see the same basic story unfolding. And it's going to be another nail in the coffin of the American empire because its junior partner, Europe, is going to become a tremendous problem and not much of an ally. The emerging bloc in the world economy, BRICS, is noteworthy because it's not about Europe. Europe is outside the story. The BRICS is the global south. There was a rumor, I believe it's true, that a year or two ago, Mr. Macron actually inquired whether France could join the BRICS. And he was told, no, thank you. Meanwhile, last week, Indonesia joined the BRICS. The writing is on the wall. This is an accumulation of problems that haven't been solved. The problem of the dollar, the problem of balance of payment, the problem of internal productivity, the problem of changing global trade patterns, and above all, the emergence of China and its allies with their own agenda who are not held back by the kinds of problems that are affecting the West. And that's the story of the decline of one global regime and the emergence of another. We are living through that, but we shouldn't be so focused on each of the little steps at risk of losing the larger picture. We are living at a time of mounting global, multiple economic problems, the result of a failure to deal with them for quite a while. And now they are reinforcing or feeding one another so that what you can't do in Central Asia worsens your problem in Europe or vice versa. What you can't do in Canada or Mexico makes other problems you have that much worse. And if his judicial appointments wage a revenge war against Democrats, if that part of the theater is taken seriously, that the internal struggles in this society add a whole nother uncertainty as to the outcome of all of this. There's no reason to expect that this country will be any further along in solving its problems after 4 more years of Trump than it was after the first 4 years of Trump or the next 4 years of Biden. Nothing is happening here that gives you a sense we're going to be dealing with these problems in an effective way. The historical tensions we are now living through are going to blow a lot of these politicians out of the water. The inadequacy of their theater, which defines their whole careers, will make them persona non grata in their own societies, and they will go into physical and emotional decline because they've become totally irrelevant. The conditions in Europe had changed. Germany, upward and onward as the powerhouse of the European economy, as the great exporter of the capitalist world, this was done. Between what had happened, what the Chinese did, and the change in the United States, and the declining Western Empire, Germany was caught. And Germany has been caught ever since. The decline of Germany from being the engine of the European economy to now being among the worst performers of the European economies, currently either in recession or very close thereto. I mean, that is an extraordinary come down. And no one sees a reversal of this. Mr. Musk has now bought the American government, and he has made major moves to buy the Canadian, the Argentinian, and now the German government. And those are rich countries. Most other countries are cheaper for him to buy. But he played a major role in Argentina to support Milei, who's going to have a large difficulty surviving, Mr. Trudeau, whom he basically helped knock off, and now Mr. Schultz, whom he's working hard to defeat. And I think, yes, all of those political forces will have big debts to Mr. Musk, which he will collect on. And that will make him more wealthy, and so he can buy more. But that's how this works. And the liberals who moan and groan about all of this are just fakers. They're the ones who can't find the common thread here, because it traces itself back to Karl Marx. Of course, therefore, has to be a taboo. They all know what's going on. Many of them are competing for Mr. Musk's money as they speak. And George Soros, he funded a lot of anti-Russian activity at one point, so he endeared himself to them. Then he funds anti-communist activity, that endears him to the right. He funds anti-leftist stuff, that endears him more to the right. This is not serious. He's just looking for the bullshit that covers the money. What he has is money in a system which values the money above all else, so puts him in a very powerful position. And there's no opposition that I can see. It's extraordinary. The level of corruption, if by that you mean the dependence of the political system on the richest entities that they supposedly govern, that has been going on for so long that it has become routine and normalized and acceptable. And he gets away with being only the most extreme example, but the idea of it has long been accepted. Citizens United or any of the other legislative steps and regulations in one country or another that allow the money to make the difference. It makes the commitment of an international value-driven system such an absurd joke, such a horrible irony perpetrated on the people. I mean, we don't have a value-driven international system. We have an international system that is totally for sale and is being purchased by the richest among us, which is how a market system works. We explain to an audience what is so elemental that the only really interesting question is, why do you have to explain this to people? It's like explaining in the morning the sun comes up. Well, shouldn't come as much of a surprise. A market is a system that when there's a scarcity of goods, allocates the scarcity to those who have the most money, because a scarcity, a demand greater than supply, which is all that scarcity ever meant. When there's a demand greater than supply, you don't distribute the supply according to people's needs, according to people's work, according to people's contribution. You distribute it by having the price be bid up, so only the richest can afford it. And there is no ethical or moral system that I know of that justifies doing that. The rich person gets the scarce milk to feed their cat, while the poor person goes without the milk needed to feed their children. That's the way the market works.